This is ChangeMakers with Katie Goar, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
Today's changemaker is Jason Blain, the senior commercial banker at Independent Bank, where he leads community development, lending focused on expanding affordable housing. Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Katie. So great to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you, and I'm very excited because of this perspective of thinking how a banker is working and thinking like a community builder is quite unique to you and how the bank is operating. But first, you've been in the industry for about 2 decades. I'd love to hear your perspective on that intersection of banking and housing.
For me, I think this intersection of banking and housing ties back to my background and the childhood I had, where I grew up in a small business in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We were a manufactured home dealership. It was a business that my mother ran for over 30 years, and so that's where it really all started for me, was being involved in housing, seeing the difference you can make in people's lives by creating housing. Um, that type of housing, oftentimes is naturally occurring affordable housing. And so I developed a passion at that point for, just through my childhood, in ways you really don't understand as you're growing up and working in a business. And, it became a real passion of mine to be involved with housing. And then in my banking career, I've had the opportunity to be involved with affordable housing and tax credit investment, tax credit investment into low income housing tax credit projects throughout the state of Michigan. And what I found is, for me, it's a passion. It's an intersection of what I love to do, what I feel passionate about, but it's also a priority for Independent Bank. And so, as a community bank here in the state of Michigan, for our bank, it's about giving back to our communities, helping our clients and our communities be independent. And so a lot of that starts with housing, safe, quality, affordable housing. So that intersection of where my interests lie, my passion lies, where the bank's, mission and vision is to support our communities. It's really a great fit for me to do what I love to do, and try to create additional affordable housing units in Michigan.
Independent Bank is a regional community bank. You're doing work in Michigan. For listeners who may not be familiar with the uniqueness or the role that a bank like yours plays, will you just explain how a regional bank functions and how you're playing in that affordable housing ecosystem?
Sure. Thanks, Katie. So Independent Bank is in the state of Michigan. We have about 60 offices across the state of Michigan, all in the lower peninsula of Michigan. And as a bank that's, rooted in our communities since the 1860s, our bank is focused on all the financial needs of households in the state of Michigan and small to medium sized businesses. Where housing becomes a priority for us is, it's a need across the entire state of Michigan. There's a housing shortage. It's very well known in Michigan. And there's been a lot of great work here by the Housing Finance Agency, MISHDA, and developers in the communities that we work in. But there's a housing shortage, and we know that we need to play a role in that. And so, as a bank our size, different than some of the large regional or national banks, we are somewhat limited in the amount of tax credit equity that we can invest into these projects, just based on regulatory requirements for how much banks can invest into low income housing tax credits. So what we do is we try to support affordable housing, and I'm primarily focused on the low income housing tax credit projects, and we support those in the best way that we can. And so that's really threefold. We provide debt to those projects, so construction and permanent loans. We do provide tax credit equity to those projects. Some of it's through our syndicator partners like Sinair. Some of it's directly invested through independent community capital, a subsidiary we created so that we could invest directly into certain low-income housing tax credit projects in our footprint. And then the third way would be AHP grants. So the Affordable Housing Program grant from the Federal Home Loan Bank is a really nice gap funding tool that has become um, it's become more important as construction costs have continued to rise, and the gaps in pro formas of these projects has continued to become more of a focal point. And so we help developers access those grants through the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis. And we've had since 2020, we've had $8.5 million of those grants support 706 affordable housing units. So that's been just a really great tool, all in that effort to find ways that as a bank our size, what's the best way that we can support affordable housing in Michigan?
Hmm. I think you answered my question, but as you were describing it, I started wondering. It was like exactly when in that development pipeline, when a developer is trying to build or preserve affordable housing, where you're entering into the picture. I think you mentioned, at the beginning of the pipeline, but is that correct?
It is, there will be some pre-development activity that occurs before a new development finds its way to any bank, investor, or tax credit syndicator. And what we do to help those developers during that process is we support their applications for tax credits to MISHDA. So we are involved early in the process,
Mhm.
but typically there will be some work that goes in for pre-development activity, and it could be like an RFP that a municipality um, is using to award a certain site for development. And we are early enough that oftentimes we are involved for multiple years with these projects before you see a groundbreaking. And so sometimes these developments need to apply for the 9% tax credit round multiple times before they're successful. Sometimes they need to apply for the AHP grant multiple times. We've had some that have applied 3 times before they were successful. And so we really try to take a long-term approach with that type of support because we know it doesn't happen overnight, but if you're consistent, if you're patient and you're willing to do that work, it will typically in the end result in a new development and then all that goes along with that with safe, quality, affordable housing.
Mhm. You mentioned the partnership with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis and this affordable housing program, the AHP. Uh, Walk us through how that partnership works. How long have you had it? Give us some more information about how that process has evolved, maybe even over the years.
Sure. It's something that started during the Great Depression when the um, federal government created the Federal Home Loan Bank districts across the United States. We happen to be in Michigan, part of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis that covers Michigan and Indiana. The Federal Home Loan Bank is a bank for banks in a sense. You won't find a branch for the Federal Home Loan Bank. They were created to support the financial system through providing sources of capital to banks. What's great about that is through their charter, um, they have a commitment that 10% of their annual earnings will go back into the communities they serve in the forms of various community programs. The Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis has actually taken that a step further, and they have a discretionary component of those programs as well, where they're investing back into the communities beyond what's required of them. And so their flagship program is the AHP grant program, which supports affordable housing across Michigan and Indiana. And it is a program that can support rental housing or for sale, but it's primarily been a tool that we've used with creation of new low-income housing units across the state of Michigan.
Mhm. Can you talk a little bit about the rate buy down structures? And this is a little bit of the banking nuances, but it's a real tool that's important for today's financing environment. So, can you cover some of those basics for us?
Thanks, Katie. So the rate buydown program was another unique program that the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis came up with. So a lot of credit to Anna Shires at the Federal Home Loan Bank, who does outreach in the state of Michigan. She made a lot of connections in Michigan for banks and credit unions to be able to access that program and connect um, the parties involved. And so what we were able to do with what they called the CDFI rate buy down program was provide lower cost of capital here in Michigan to CDFIs or community development financial institutions in an environment where interest rates are higher than they had been 5 years ago.
Mhm.
And so a lot of these CDFIs in Michigan that support not only small businesses in Michigan, but also real estate projects, including housing projects in Michigan. These CDFIs were you know, having a bit of a harder time striking the right balance of raising capital that fit with their business model, where they could then turn around and lend it out into small business or housing projects or other real estate projects in Michigan. So the CDFI rate buy down program provided a way for independent bank to support those CDFIs in the state of Michigan with a subsidy from the Federal Home Loan Bank. So a really, win-win program that they created. There are more details that I believe will be forthcoming about how that program's going to evolve for 2026 with more of a focus on housing. So we're really excited about that and what that can mean for just finding ways to provide capital and subsidy to these developments that so badly need it to be able to create housing that has truly affordable rents.
Mhm. So, in non banking terms, that is really a tool to be able to add for financing for developers to build housing better, more cost effective, and possibly quicker. Is that a good layman's description on that particular tool?
Yes, I think it is, and I think with what's been just kind of broadly announced by the Federal Home Loan Bank for 2026, more applicability to housing and helping control costs because as developers build affordable housing units, there are the obvious costs, the bricks and the sticks, and everything we see built vertically. And of course, all that goes into hard construction costs. But there are soft costs that are incurred for these developments, interest carry, other carrying costs of a construction project. And so this is just another nice tool to help reduce those costs and be able to put more money into what really matters. And that's the bricks, the sticks, and the building that residents live in.
Mhm. You mentioned another tool, tax credits, earlier, and they're often very, very competitive, very complex, but they're so crucial as a backbone to affordable housing. It's a space you guys work in. From where you sit, what do you think? And this is more subjective. I realize this, but what do you think's working in the current system? Or is there something that you think needs improved as it comes as it relates to some of that tax credit components? Just anything you want to speculate on there? Are you allowed to speculate? Oh, it's just tax credits. Everybody talks about them. Everybody wants them, but they're so complex. Any insight there?
I think the program is I think it's overall very well designed to create a public-private partnership to create housing.
Mhm.
And I think, what you see across the entire country and here in Michigan is the low-income housing tax credit program being the driving source for new affordable housing units. And so I think, we get it mostly right most of the time. And so I'm optimistic. Um, if you think about what we may do to, adapt and change and improve, um, one of the components that I'm really excited about that's in the bill that was sent back to the House from the Senate, the 21st Century Road to Housing Bill, is a provision that would allow banks to invest a larger percentage of their capital in public welfare investments. And so that could be a really nice um, adjustment to some of the restraints that are in the industry right now, and allowing more capital to flow into affordable housing projects.
So turning on the pipeline a little more, right?
Exactly. If we can s- contribute more equity into affordable housing developments and other banks around us can do the same, it's really going to pair nicely with some of the other changes to the low income housing tax credit that were recently passed, where there's additional allocation of the 9% credit, um, the changes to the 50% test on the 4% low-income housing tax credit projects, allowing for more creation of affordable housing through the 4% credit. As that supply of credits increases, we really need to pair it with more demand from investors. And so I think that that will help. And so I'm really excited about that federally. On a state level here in Michigan, there was a bill that was just introduced last week that is geared towards a state low-income housing tax credit. We are one of the few states that does not have a state LIHTC program. We have a very supportive state housing finance agency with MISHDA. Our governor has been very supportive of affordable housing. The state LIHTC could be, I think, a real game changer here in Michigan to support more of affordable housing units, particularly with the 4% tax credit program when you pair the 4% federal LIHTC with the state LIHTC. And so we're excited. There's, I think a lot of optimism in Michigan. Everyone knows the task at hand, and throughout the state, there's a lot of support to try to figure out solutions.
Mhm. Well, that's a promising prospect on the horizon. Many people will be watching that for sure. I want to switch over. We talked about the tools, we talked about the mechanisms, some of the structural pieces. I want to switch over to something I read in particular about what you guys have been involved in as far as a project. And this one really spoke to me. I have two kids with special needs. And so when I was reading your information about this particular project, I really, it just hit personally, professionally. It also spoke to one of my fears as I'm raising these children who are not going to have access to independent living. And so this particular project I want to read from, and then I want to have you comment on it. It really hit home for me. So I made some notes here because I want to do it justice, but you just partnered with a 77 unit community called Ability Way being built in Grand Haven, Michigan. It says here the goal is to expand independent living options for adults with intellectual disabilities. So you Independent Bank was a key financial partner in that project. Can you brag about that project in particular and tell us some more details about it?
Yeah, thanks, Katie. And as you know, we share that in common. I have one child with special needs. Kai has Down syndrome. And I too think about his future and for any child like Kai and what their life will look like, and hopefully at some point, they're able to kind of maximize their independence, but also have support around them. And so this Ability Way development in Grand Haven is with a local nonprofit called Gracious Grounds, and they were able to partner with a third generation local housing tax credit developer, Reinders, in the state of Michigan that Independent Bank works with. And so a really nice partnership there where this development had been on the drawing board for 10 years. And so these developments don't happen overnight. Um, but a lot of efforts to bring this to the point where now it's under construction. Um, they have currently um, 50 residents that they Gracious Grounds houses more of a scattered site focus with a few different locations. They're really excited because this expands the number of units. They have a waiting list that this will help address, and it gave them an opportunity to try to design something that they knew would work for them from their years of experience and what their residents need. But just a really fantastic way to leverage the low income housing tax credit program and solve not just affordable housing needs, but affordable housing needs for you know a base of residents, a population of people that I'm really passionate about. I think most people are really passionate about serving. And so I couldn't be more excited about what they're creating there. And just, we did play a role as the low income housing tax credit investor and a lender on the project. But really all the credit to the development team, the nonprofit Gracious Grounds, their board, their executive director, Matt. Um, years and years in the making. And I'm really excited to see that development finish construction and what it's going to do in Grand Haven.
Well, it's a nice alignment of your time and your talents, but also something that you're connected with. And I think that so many of us are in the business of the nuances of compliance or regulation, but then when we can, really see that it's fitting a need for the community and there's connectivity, it's a beautiful thing. I often think about, how my children are going to be able to live, in the event that something happens to me. And, you just hope that there's a community option like what Gracious Grounds is stepping in and helping. So it's a beautiful thing when you can see that materialize, isn't it?
It is. And I think it's a model that, through their work can be replicated. And so that's exciting too, that, hopefully we'll look back and this will have, inspired, other developers, other communities to be able to do something similar.
Hmm. It's when you look at a community, though, there are certain pockets that are traditionally overlooked. So it's promising, like you're thinking about the success in the long run that they are solving this. So great job to the team there that's doing this. From your perspective, though, is what would need to shift maybe in the financing world to make more of this more common?
Yeah. And Katie, you had mentioned, sometimes we get caught up in some of these details, compliance that are very important to the low income housing tax credit program. Um, and I think what Ability Way can do, maybe to set a precedent for future development similar to this, is prove out a model that um, can be built, leased up, and operated, and not have compliance issues. um, there's a development team and property management team that's very experienced in low income housing tax credits that's involved in this development. And so I think when something's a little bit different than what we're used to seeing, sometimes that can create um, a sense of higher risk involved in the project. So as this project moves forward and you pair this kind of the vision and the nonprofits involvement with industry professionals that are focused on LIHTC on a project together, and as it proves out its success, I think that could pave the way for other projects like this to be supported. And then maybe this misperception of something being a little bit different, posing higher risk, would be would be something that we would overcome through Gracious Grounds, you know paving the way for more developments like this.
Hmm. Another aspect of affordable housing when we're thinking about expanding it, improving it, um, is a lot of people think of affordable housing just related to the rental housing and the market. But I knew some of the work that you touch on also leads into homeownership as well. What do you think about homeownership in the broader affordability conversation?
It is an area that Independent Bank is absolutely focused on. Part of our mortgage team is just dedicated to providing residential mortgages and down payment assistance to first-time home buyers, lower income home buyers. And so that's a key focus for Independent Bank. Um, One of the models that we're starting to be more active with are community land trusts, where Independent Bank can finance buyers of community land trust homes, either through Fannie or Freddie, who's then investing in those mortgages. But we also have the ability as a bank to hold those loans on our books, so it gives us a little bit of um, flexibility and additional tools in the toolbox to support affordable housing. In Michigan, those community land trusts are, leveraging grants and other incentives to be able to drive down the cost of the homes that ultimately then is, passed on to the buyer through the purchase price. Uh, in some cases, it's 100 to $200,000 per unit that the purchase price is under what it costs to build these homes. And so I think that's a really nice tool that's becoming more common in the state of Michigan. But overall, Independent Bank is focused on home ownership for those types of houses, but really any affordable home that someone is able to trying to help that dream become reality for a home buyer through down payment assistance and just financial literacy and helping people understand how to become a homeowner. We recognize that the rental units that we're supporting are very important, but also we need to also support home ownership so people can create generational wealth through home ownership, and it can start with that first home purchase.
At Quadell, we recently created a brand new first in our ever 50-year history, a first-time home buyer down payment assistance program, and, it's been received very, very well. We've had a couple of people already close on properties and offered homeownership counseling as a part of that program, but when you do think of making a first step for generational wealth, this is one way, not the only way, but it is a way that we recognize that we weren't doing enough in that space. So, accessing programs like this um, really can take a step forward. And there's controversy. I mean, as far as rental versus home ownership, and all of that's a very fair social discussion. But for people who do want to move into the home ownership space, these down payment grants paired with what they've saved, paired with tax refunds, whatever the pieces are, they do make a big difference. And so these are these remain important tools for wealth building and long-term generational stability. So I appreciate what you guys are doing there too. Switching gears a little, kind of going over to a different side of this, I want to highlight that you were recently recognized with the Community Spirit Award. Congratulations. That came from the Federal Home Loan Bank in Indianapolis. It's for your contributions in affordable housing. What did that award mean to you, or what did it signify about your role or the role of banks?
I was flattered by the recognition for sure. I always like to think about what we do in terms of the team that does the work. So, I think it's a reflection of what Independent Bank is doing, but also the Federal Home Loan Bank and their support. I think I mentioned Anna Shires, Mike Recker, who runs the AHP program. a lot of people all involved in the industry trying to, solve a common issue, working towards a common goal. And the developers we work with, I mean, you can't give them enough credit for the work they do, the risks they take to be able to create housing. And so, we worked with several developers in the state of Michigan that have been involved with creation of affordable housing, a lot of them using this AHP grant. And so, I was recognized, but very much you know, related to the effort of a lot of people, the team, I would say, this the broader team that's involved. And so, um, on a personal note, I did have an opportunity a couple years ago to consider relocating my family from Traverse City, Michigan, which is an incredible community. And most people would say, why would you ever leave Traverse City, especially with 4 children? But it was really an opportunity, one, for my son Kai, who we talked about, to have more resources here in West Michigan, but also for me professionally to focus solely on affordable housing. And so, um, in a way, the recognition is a little bit of validation that I'm doing what I'm meant to do here, and you know, and overall, it's been just really great opportunity to do the work that I enjoy doing, feel passionate about, and hopefully continue to do more for years to come.
When you think about the legacy of what Kai is doing for you and your family, and you've mentioned him a couple of times, isn't it interesting how one person really can make a difference in the world? I mean, we use that phrase commonly. People try to aspire to it, but then when you actually, like, see somebody know somebody, then you're like, "Oh, this really does work." And anything you want to share about your experience, his input, into your family, um, anything, uh, you wanna mention related to that?
Kai is just full of joy, and people who are around him see it. And we live in a great community here in West Michigan where Kai has a lot of support. Um, but I do feel like what you see is not only Kai benefiting from the support around him, but the people that support him benefiting from, his presence and the joy that he brings. Um, and so, you know, his his needs and what he needs in the future for housing is something that I think about a lot. It drives me. It drives my efforts and what I do. And yeah, so I think in a way, you can tie that back to one person and kind of the inspiration he is to people around him, one of which is me, and helps drive me forward. And we're just getting started, I think. There's probably gonna be
Mhm.
a lot of stories about how Kai and what he brings to the world impacts our community in bigger ways in the future. So I'm excited for that.
I know when I think about my own children, Rama and Bodhi, I think about, it really opened my eyes to think about compassion and injustice differently. It was a stark confrontation to what so many other people in their own lives are up against. And so just having a different view of how, like, more depth of compassion from my perspective. And it really changed my world in a lot of different areas. So, we're still learning, even though we've been around for decades and decades. We're all still learning in this together. And, sometimes our children are teaching us instead of just us teaching our children.
That's an area that, until Kai was part of our family, we probably didn't fully understand that depth of compassion that should have, can have, and my wife Erica and our children uh, are, just great supporters of Kai, and I also think we all benefit from being around him, and um, you know what he does for us is more than we do for him, and always will be.
Mhm. Well, Jason, as we close out here, is there something that we missed that you'd like to highlight, or maybe something that makes you really optimistic that can actually move the needle in affordable housing or tax credit or any of the community development finance world? Sort of like a pie in the sky kind of question here, but I want to close out and give you another chance to give hope in that space, or what you're seeing is on the horizon that you're excited for. Anything?
One of the takeaways I've had from working in banking and affordable housing primarily for most of my career is that, sometimes small projects or developments or, one unit or two units is life changing for the residents that ultimately occupy, that housing. And so I think my hope for what we're doing and just kind of the momentum across the state of Michigan is that more more banks, as we play our role in the ecosystem of housing, will become involved. We've recently had a conference. The Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis arranged it with our bank and a credit union and another bank in Michigan that are kind of more of the leaders of affordable housing, um, amongst the Michigan banks, bringing together smaller banks throughout the state of Michigan, other credit unions, to try to help, provide more information or guidance on how other banks can come into this ecosystem and help. And so my feeling is that there's like no part that's too small to play. If you can be involved some way as a financial institution like we are, but maybe on a smaller scale, it's going to make an impact. And if you're a developer and you're building one unit, that's an important unit. And so we don't need every project to be 60 units or 80 units. We need all sizes, everyone that can be supportive and involved. We need them to help solve the housing shortage in Michigan. So that's
Mhm.
what I'm optimistic about is I think there's momentum. I think there's a lot
Right.
of people who care and a independent bank, but others in our space that are coming to the table and trying to help.
Right. Again, I've been talking with Jason Blain, the senior commercial banker with Independent Bank, who is leading community development focused on expanding affordable housing across Michigan. Jason, thank you so much for your time and the team and all the great things that you were doing.
Thanks, Katie. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to ChangeMakers with Katie Goar. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.